The castle had been silent for months. No cries, no laughter, only the sound of the wind brushing against stone and the vampire king sitting alone in the dark. His twin children were born cursed, paralyzed, unable to speak. Every healer, every sorcerer, every priest failed. Even the king himself, with all his centuries of power, couldn't save his own blood. Then one night, he woke to a sound he hadn't heard in years, a laugh. Faint, fragile, but real. He followed it down the corridor past the sleeping guards to the nursery door left slightly open. Inside, the maid was kneeling beside the twins. Her hands were glowing faintly, her voice whispering an ancient lullaby, one that no human should have known. And when the king stepped closer, his immortal heart stopped, because the twins, his lifeless children, were sitting up, reaching for her, and whispering their first word, "Papa, stay with me until the end," because what the king discovered about that maid would change the fate of his entire bloodline. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. King Aldrich had ruled for 700 years. He'd conquered kingdoms, commanded armies of the undead, and bent the very elements to his will. But nothing had prepared him for the helplessness of watching his own children fade away. The twins had been born 3 months ago during the blood moon, a sign the court mystics claimed was auspicious. Instead, it brought only despair. Prince Darian and Princess Lyra emerged into the world silent and still. Their tiny bodies refused to move. Their voices remained locked away. The royal physicians worked tirelessly. Ancient vampires who'd witnessed the rise and fall of empires stood baffled. The court's most powerful sorcerers chanted incantations that shook the very foundations of the castle. Nothing worked. Aldrich hired human specialists, brought in healers from distant lands, even sought help from the Fey courts, swallowing his pride to beg assistance from beings he'd once considered beneath him. Each failure carved deeper into his soul. The queen, Elena, had grown distant. She spent her days staring out the tower windows. Her once vibrant spirit dimmed to embers. She barely spoke anymore. When she did, it was only to blame herself for their children's condition. The castle staff moved through their duties like ghosts. No one dared speak above a whisper. The very air seemed heavy with grief and resignation. Even the ancient gargoyles perched on the battlements appeared to weep stone tears. But it was the nights that destroyed him most. Aldrich would sit beside the twins' cradles, watching their small chests rise and fall. Sometimes he'd reach out to touch their faces, hoping for any sign of recognition. Their eyes would track movement occasionally, but they remained trapped in bodies that wouldn't obey their will. The kingdom began to whisper. Nobles questioned whether cursed heirs could inherit the throne. Rival vampire clans sent subtle messages, probing for weakness. Enemies who'd feared Aldrich for centuries began to circle like vultures. He'd dismissed half the castle staff over the past month. Not from anger, but from necessity. What was the point of nursemaids when the children couldn't be cared for in any meaningful way? What use were tutors when there were no students to teach? Only essential personnel remained. Guards, cooks, a handful of trusted advisors who'd served his family for generations. And Mira. Mira was new. She'd arrived at the castle gates 6 weeks ago, seeking employment as a kitchen maid. Young, maybe 25, with auburn hair and green eyes that seemed older than her years. Her references were impeccable, her manner respectful but not servile. What struck Aldrich most was that she didn't look at him with the usual mixture of fear and awe that mortals displayed. She met his eyes directly, as if seeing the father beneath the monster. When the head of staff suggested dismissing more servants, Mira had quietly requested to help with the twins. Not as their caretaker, she was quick to clarify. Simply to clean their room, change their bedding, ensure their comfort. Aldrich had agreed without much thought. What harm could one more person do in a situation already beyond hope? He'd noticed small changes after she started. The twins' room always smelled of lavender now, Their blankets were perfectly arranged. Someone had placed fresh flowers by the window, replacing them daily even though the children couldn't appreciate the gesture. More strangely, the twins seemed calmer when she was present. Their tiny faces, usually scrunched with what looked like discomfort, would relax. Their breathing steadied. It was probably coincidence, but Aldrich found himself grateful for any peace his children could find. The night everything changed started like all the others. Aldrich had fallen asleep in his study again. Empty wine bottles surrounded his chair. Reports from his spies lay unread on his desk. The weight of ruling while watching his children suffer had become unbearable. He woke to something impossible, the sound of a child laughing. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, or perhaps finally losing his sanity as Elena seemed to be. But the sound came again, soft, musical, definitely real. Aldrich moved through the castle corridors like smoke, his supernatural speed carrying him toward the sound. Past the great hall where moonlight streamed through stained glass windows, past the portrait gallery where his ancestors watched with painted eyes, past the guards who slept at their posts. Unaware their king prowled the midnight halls. The nursery door stood slightly ajar. Golden light spilled through the gap, warmer than any candle or oil lamp, and from within came voices. One familiar, one impossible. Mira knelt beside the twins' cradles, but she wasn't the same servant who'd cleaned their room during the day. Her auburn hair seemed to catch light from nowhere, glowing with inner fire. Her skin had a luminescence that spoke of magic older than his kingdom, but it was her hands that made Aldrich's breath catch. They moved in graceful patterns above the twins, trailing sparkles of silver and gold. Ancient symbols formed in the air, hanging for moments before dissolving into stardust. Her voice rose and fell in a melody that tugged at memories Aldrich couldn't quite place. Words in a language that predated human civilization. A lullaby that spoke of starlight and growing things, of hope flowering in impossible places, and the twins were responding. Prince Darian's tiny fingers flexed, grasping at the lights dancing above him. Princess Lyra turned her head, following the patterns Mira traced. Their eyes, usually vacant, now sparkled with awareness and wonder. As Aldrich watched, paralyzed by shock and hope, both children began to move. Not the random twitching they'd displayed before, but purposeful motion. Darian pushed himself up on his elbows. Lyra rolled onto her side, reaching toward the maid who sang to them. Then came the sound that shattered 700 years of composure. Papa. The word was barely a whisper, spoken in unison by voices that had never made sound before, but Aldrich heard it as clearly as thunder. Mira's head snapped up, her glowing hands freezing mid-gesture. The ancient song died on her lips as she met Aldrich's eyes across the nursery. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, neither moved. The twins continued reaching toward their father, small voices calling Papa with increasing urgency. The maid's luminescent skin flickered like a candle in wind. Her shoulders squared as if bracing for execution. She'd been caught performing magic in the Vampire King's castle, using power that no mere human should possess, touching his cursed children when others had been dismissed for far less. But Aldrich wasn't looking at her. His ancient eyes were fixed on his son and daughter, who were now pushing themselves fully upright. Darian's tiny hand wrapped around the edge of his cradle with strength that shouldn't exist. Lyra babbled soft sounds, her voice growing stronger with each attempt. How? The word escaped Aldrich like a prayer. He moved closer, afraid that any sudden motion might shatter whatever miracle was unfolding before him. Mira remained kneeling, but her chin lifted with quiet dignity. Your Majesty, I can explain. Explain later. Aldrich dropped to his knees beside his children's cradles. Darian immediately reached for him, and when those small fingers closed around his own, the Vampire King felt tears he hadn't shed in centuries burning his eyes. What did you do to them? I gave them what they were missing. Mira's voice was steady despite the fear flickering in her green eyes. What the curse stole from them. Lyra made a sound that might have been laughter. Her legs, motionless for 3 months, kicked against her blankets. The movement was weak, unsteady, but undeniably real. She was fighting to move, to live, to be. Aldrich lifted his daughter from her cradle with trembling hands. Her weight felt different now, not the dead weight of a broken doll, but the vital heaviness of a living child. She nestled against his chest, her tiny fist tangling in his dark hair. "Papa," she whispered again, and the word hit him like a physical blow. "How long?" he asked Mira without looking away from Lyra's face. "How long have you been doing this?" "Every night since I arrived." The admission hung between them like a blade. "I couldn't leave them like that. I couldn't watch them fade when I knew I could help," Darian whimpered, reaching from his cradle. Aldrich shifted Lyra to one arm and lifted his son with the other. The boy immediately curled against his father's shoulder, small fingers exploring the texture of Aldrich's shirt with wonder. For the first time in months, King Aldrich held both his children, alive, aware, looking at him with eyes that recognized him as their father. The rage came slowly, building like a storm on the horizon, not at Mira, but at the cosmic cruelty that had stolen these moments from him, at the helplessness that had consumed his days, at the despair that had nearly broken his queen. "You let me suffer." His voice was dangerously quiet. "For 6 weeks you watched me tear myself apart believing my children were lost. You watched Elena retreat into madness. You watched this kingdom begin to fracture." Mira's glow flickered, but she didn't flinch. "If I'd revealed myself immediately, would you have trusted me? A strange human with impossible power, claiming she could heal what your greatest sorcerers could not?" The question struck home. Aldrich knew the answer. He would have suspected deception, dark magic, some elaborate plot against his family. He might have killed her before she could explain. "The healing had to be gradual," Mira continued. "Their bodies were locked away from their souls. I had to coax them back piece by piece, night by night. Too much too fast would have shattered their minds." Darian giggled, the sound like silver bells in the quiet room. He was studying his own hand, flexing tiny fingers with fascination. Every movement was a miracle Aldrich had stopped believing in. "What are you?" The king's voice held no threat now, only desperate curiosity. Mira rose gracefully, her supernatural radiance dimming to something almost human. Almost. "I am what remains of the old magic, before vampires ruled the night, before humans forgot how to heal with starlight and song." She moved to the window where moonbeams painted silver squares on the stone floor. "Your twins weren't cursed, Your Majesty. They were severed. Something cut the connection between their souls and their bodies during birth." "The blood moon," Aldrich breathed. He remembered the moment they'd emerged. How the crimson light had seemed to reach into the delivery room like grasping fingers. A powerful entity fed on their life force as they entered the world, left them trapped in shells that couldn't respond to their will. Mira's hands began to glow again, softer now, like captured moonlight. "I've been weaving their souls back into their flesh, teaching their spirits how to command their bodies again." Lyra made a sound that was definitely laughter this time. She was watching the lights dance around Mira's fingers, clapping her hands together in delight. The gesture was clumsy, uncoordinated, but intentional. "How much more?" Aldrich asked. "How much more do they need?" "Weeks, perhaps months for full recovery. Their minds are sharp, trapped, and aware all this time. But their bodies need to remember how to be strong." Mira turned from the window. "The question is whether you'll allow me to continue." The Vampire King looked down at his children. Darian was trying to form words, his mouth working around sounds that almost resembled mama and more. Lyra had grabbed a fistful of Aldrich's hair and was examining it with scientific intensity. They were his children. Not the broken dolls he'd been mourning, but living beings with personalities already beginning to shine through their newfound mobility. "Elena," he said suddenly, "the Queen needs to see this." "Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss my true nature before involving others." Mira's composure cracked slightly. "There are complications to my being here. Consequences that extend beyond your family." But Aldrich was already moving toward the door, his children secure in his arms. "Elena!" His voice boomed through the castle corridors, carrying joy and desperation in equal measure. "Elena, come quickly." Footsteps pounded through the halls, not just the queen's delicate steps, but the heavy boots of guards. The rushed movement of servants awakened by their king's shouts. The entire castle was stirring, drawn by sounds they hadn't heard in months. Elena appeared in the doorway wearing only her nightgown, her golden hair wild with sleep. Her eyes found Aldrich first, then dropped to the children in his arms. Children who were moving, reaching, looking back at her with bright awareness. "Lyra?" Elena's voice broke on her daughter's name. The little girl turned toward her mother's voice and smiled, actually smiled, the expression transforming her tiny face with pure joy. Elena crossed the room in 3 swift strides and gathered both children into her arms. They snuggled against her immediately, Darian patting her cheek with wonder while Lyra grabbed fistfuls of golden hair. "Mama," Darian whispered, the word clear and perfect. The queen looked up at her husband with tears streaming down her face. "How? What happened?" Aldrich's gaze found Mira, who had pressed herself against the far wall as more people filled the doorway. Guards, servants, even some nobles who'd been staying in the guest quarters, all drawn by the impossible sounds of royal children laughing. "The maid," Aldrich said simply. "She's been healing them." Every eye in the room turned to Mira. She stood perfectly still, her supernatural glow completely suppressed now. To most observers, she looked like any other servant, young, nervous, overwhelmed by sudden attention. But Aldrich could see the power coiled beneath her human facade, the way shadows bent slightly around her, how the moonlight streaming through the windows seemed drawn to her presence. "Impossible," whispered Lord Cassius, Aldrich's oldest advisor. "We consulted the greatest healers in existence. Clearly we missed one," Elena said, her voice thick with gratitude and wonder. She looked at Mira with something approaching worship. "How can we ever repay you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, because payment implied transaction, and Aldrich was beginning to understand that Mira's presence here was far more complex than a simple act of kindness. Guards were still filtering into the room, their hands resting on weapon hilts out of habit. Nobles whispered among themselves, already calculating how this miracle might affect court politics. The twins continued babbling and reaching, oblivious to the storm their recovery was about to unleash, and in the center of it all stood a mysterious woman with ancient power, who just made the Vampire King's children whole again. Just made the Vampire King's children whole again. The silence that followed Elena's question stretched like a held breath. Mira remained pressed against the stone wall, her green eyes darting between the assembled crowd and the doorway behind them. Aldrich could smell her fear now, sharp and metallic beneath the lingering traces of starlight magic. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps this conversation would be better held in private." Lord Cassius stepped forward, his ancient vampire instincts prickling. "A human servant performing magic in the royal nursery. This requires immediate investigation." His pale eyes fixed on Mira with predatory interest. "What manner of sorcery have you been practicing on the heirs?" "Healing," Elena said fiercely, clutching the twins closer. Both children had grown quiet, sensing the tension in the room. Lyra's tiny hand wrapped around her mother's finger, while Darian pressed his face against Elena's neck. "She's been healing our children, while the rest of us stood helpless." "Magic that powerful doesn't come without cost," whispered Lady Morwen from the doorway. The court's chief mystic pushed through the crowd, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. What price did she demand? What binding did she place on the royal bloodline? Mira's composure cracked. "I asked for nothing. I bound no one. I simply couldn't watch them suffer when I had the power to help." "Noble words," Lord Cassius said coldly. "But power like this," he gestured, to the twins, who were now babbling softly to each other, "doesn't manifest from pure altruism. You're hiding something, girl." Aldrich watched the exchange with growing unease. His advisors were right to be suspicious. In 7 centuries of rule, He'd learned that miraculous interventions always came with strings attached. But looking at his children, seeing life spark in their eyes for the first time, he found it difficult to care about hidden motives. "Clear the room," he commanded suddenly. "Everyone except the Queen and Mira." "Your Majesty, I strongly advise against," Lord Cassius began. "Now." The word carried the weight of absolute authority. Nobles and servants filed out reluctantly, casting backward glances at the mysterious maid who'd accomplished what their greatest sorcerers could not. When the door closed, leaving only the royal family and Mira in the nursery, Elena spoke first. "Tell us the truth. All of it." Mira moved away from the wall, her shoulders straightening as if shedding a burden she'd carried too long. "The truth is complicated, Your Majesty. We have time," Aldrich said, settling into the chair beside the window. Elena remained standing, swaying gently as the twins dozed in her arms, exhausted by their first real movement in months. Mira walked to the center of the room, moonlight pooling around her feet. "I am the last of the luminal order. We were healers, guardians of the balance between light and shadow. My people served the supernatural world for millennia, keeping the peace between different magical bloodlines." "Were?" Elena's voice was sharp. "The order was destroyed 300 years ago. Hunted to extinction by those who feared our power to heal could also be turned to harm." Mira's hands began to glow softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "My mother hid me as an infant, passed me to human families who raised me believing I was one of them." Aldrich leaned forward. "But you knew what you were. The power manifested when I turned 18. Suddenly I could see the connections between soul and flesh, could sense when those bonds were damaged or severed." Her glow intensified. "I've spent 7 years learning to control it, searching for others like me. I found only graves and burned libraries." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You're alone." "I was alone, until I sensed what had happened to your children." Mira turned to face them directly. "The severance was so complete, so brutal, it called to me from hundreds of miles away. I felt their souls screaming, trapped and unable to reach their own bodies." The twins stirred in Elena's arms. Darian opened his eyes and looked directly at Mira, as if recognizing her voice. His tiny hand reached toward her, fingers grasping at empty air. "What severed them?" Aldrich asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Something ancient, hungry. It fed on their life force as they entered the world. But it didn't kill them cleanly. Instead, it left them suspended between life and death, their souls anchored but disconnected." Mira's expression darkened. "It was deliberate, cruel. Whoever orchestrated this wanted you to suffer." Elena gasped. "Someone did this intentionally?" "The blood moon was no natural occurrence, Your Majesty. It was summoned, timed precisely to coincide with the birth. Someone with intimate knowledge of your family, your kingdom, your vulnerabilities." Aldrich felt ice form in his veins. An enemy with that level of access, that degree of magical knowledge, could only be someone from his inner circle, someone he'd trusted completely. "The severance was designed to be permanent," Mira continued, "irreversible by conventional magic. Your healers and sorcerers failed because they were trying to repair something that had been surgically removed. Not just damaged, but you could fix it," Elena said. "Luminal magic works differently. We don't force healing, we guide it. I've been slowly teaching their souls how to find their way back to their bodies, rebuilding the pathways one thread at a time." Mira's glow pulsed gently. "It's delicate work. Too fast, and their minds could shatter from the sudden reconnection." Darian made a soft sound, almost like he was trying to speak. Elena looked down at him with wonder. "How much more time do they need?" "Weeks for basic mobility, months for full recovery." "But Your Majesty," Mira's voice grew urgent, "whoever did this will know their work is being undone. They'll sense the healing just as I sensed the original damage." Aldrich stood, his mind racing through possibilities. How long before they realize? Days, perhaps hours. The twins' auras are already brightening. Any skilled practitioner monitoring them will notice the change. A chill ran down Elena's spine. They're in danger again. We're all in danger, Mira corrected. Whoever orchestrated this won't hesitate to eliminate witnesses. They've already committed regicide by proxy, attacking the royal bloodline directly. Aldrich moved to the window, his supernatural senses extending through the castle and beyond. The night felt different now, charged with malevolent intent. Somewhere in his kingdom, perhaps in his own court, an enemy was stirring. You could have stayed hidden, he said without turning around. Remain safe in obscurity instead of revealing yourself to save my children. Why take that risk? Mira was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. Because I remember what it felt like to be alone and afraid, to have power but no one to share it with, no one who understood. She looked at the twins, who were watching her with bright, aware eyes. They deserved better than that isolation. Elena wiped tears from her cheeks. What do we do now? Aldrich turned from the window, his expression hardening into the mask of a king who'd survived 7 centuries of treachery and war. Now we hunt. Someone in my inner circle betrayed my family. They used blood magic to curse my children and thought they could hide behind my grief and desperation. The court will resist, Elena warned. They'll demand investigations, trials, proof before accusations. Then we give them proof. Aldrich's eyes glowed with predatory light. Mira, can you sense who cast the original severance? Is there a magical signature you can trace? Not directly, but... She hesitated. There might be another way. The entity that fed on their life force left traces, residual energy that clings to whoever summoned it. I could track that, but it would require me to use my full power. Meaning I'd have to drop every shield and concealment I maintain. Every supernatural being within 50 miles would know exactly what I am and where to find me. Her hands trembled slightly. The Luminal Order wasn't just hunted to extinction randomly, Your Majesty. We were specifically targeted because our healing abilities made us dangerous to those who profit from suffering. Elena stepped closer to her husband. There has to be another way. There might be, Mira said slowly, but it would require absolute trust from both of you. Aldrich met her gaze. Explain. I could establish a healing bond with the twins, not just guiding their recovery, but linking my life force to theirs temporarily. Anyone who attacks them would have to go through me first. Her voice grew stronger. More importantly, the bond would let me see through their eyes, experience their memories, including the moment of their birth. That's incredibly dangerous, Elena breathed. If something goes wrong, we die together, Mira finished calmly. But we might also catch your enemy in the act. See their face, understand their motives. The twins had fallen asleep in Elena's arms, their tiny bodies relaxed and peaceful in a way they'd never been before. Darian's thumb had found its way to his mouth, while Lyra's fist was tangled in her mother's golden hair. They looked like normal, healthy babies for the first time since their birth. Aldrich studied Mira's face, searching for deception or hidden agenda. All he found was exhausted determination and a deep, aching loneliness that matched his own from the past 3 months. There's something else, he said finally. Something you're not telling us. Mira's composure wavered. Your Majesty? You said you sensed their condition from hundreds of miles away, that you felt their souls screaming. Aldrich's voice grew dangerously quiet. But luminal healers were guardians of balance, not empaths with unlimited range. So either you're more powerful than you're admitting, or you have a personal connection to my children that predates their birth. The silence stretched between them like a blade. Elena looked between her husband and the maid, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Finally, Mira spoke. You're right. There is a connection. Her hands began to shake. Your Majesty, I didn't just happen to sense their condition. I felt it because, she took a shuddering breath, because I'm their aunt. The words hit like a physical blow. Elena staggered, nearly dropping the sleeping twins. Aldrich went perfectly still, his predatory instincts screaming danger. Impossible, Elena whispered. I have no sisters. My family line is well documented. Not your sister, Mira said quietly, her eyes fixed on Aldrich. His. The Vampire King's world tilted. I have no living siblings. Haven't had any for 4 centuries. You had a sister named Sarah, born 50 years after you, turned at the same time. Mira's voice grew stronger, more confident. She fell in love with a luminal healer named Marcus. When the Order was destroyed, she faked her death to protect him and their unborn child. Memories crashed through Aldrich's mind. Sarah, wild and beautiful, with their father's stubborn streak and their mother's healing touch. She'd vanished during a hunting expedition, her body never found. He'd mourned her for centuries. She's alive? The question came out strangled. She was. She died in childbirth 25 years ago, but not before telling me about my uncle who ruled the Vampire Kingdom, about my cousins who would someday need protection. Tears ran down Mira's cheeks. She made me promise to watch over the royal bloodline, to use my gifts to keep her brother's children safe. Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed. Your family. I'm a half-blood bastard with dangerous power and enemies who'll kill anyone to get to me, Mira said bitterly. I never intended to reveal the connection. I just wanted to heal the twins and disappear again. But Aldrich was moving toward her now. His expression transformed. Show me, he commanded. Show me your true form. Mira's concealment fell away like discarded clothing. Her auburn hair blazed with inner fire. Her skin gleamed with starlight. Her eyes became pools of liquid silver that reflected centuries of hidden pain and longing. And there, in the line of her jaw and the set of her shoulders, Aldrich saw his sister's face looking back at him. Sarah's daughter, he breathed. My niece. The twins stirred in Elena's arms, somehow sensing the shift in energy. They opened their eyes simultaneously and looked at Mira, then at Aldrich, their tiny faces solemn. Then Darian smiled, bright and joyful, and reached toward his newly discovered aunt with perfect trust. His newly discovered aunt with perfect trust. The moment shattered when heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Aldrich's head snapped toward the door, his centuries of survival instinct blazing to life. Someone was approaching fast, and at this hour, unexpected visitors meant danger. Hide your light, he commanded Mira in a whisper. She immediately suppressed her glow, becoming human in appearance once more. Elena clutched the twins closer, both children now fully awake and alert, their eyes darting between the adults with newfound awareness. Lord Cassius burst through the door without announcement, his pale face flushed with urgency. Behind him came Captain Thorne of the Royal Guard and Lady Morwen, the court mystic. Their expressions ranged from concern to barely concealed suspicion. Your Majesty, we've detected a massive magical disturbance centered on the royal wing, Cassius announced, his ancient eyes scanning the room. The wardstones are singing. Something has triggered the castle's deepest protective enchantments. Aldrich felt his blood turn to ice. The wardstones only responded to threats against the royal bloodline or the presence of extraordinarily powerful magic. Mira's healing work had been detected by the very systems meant to protect his family. Define disturbance, Elena said carefully, her voice steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes. Sometimes the greatest miracles come disguised as ordinary servants. King Aldrich discovered that the mysterious maid who saved his children wasn't just a healer, but his own lost family returned to him. The twins who were once trapped in silence now laugh in the halls, where only sorrow once echoed. What started as a king's desperate search for hope became the reunion of a bloodline thought forever broken. Sometimes salvation comes not from power or gold, but from love that refuses to abandon those who need it most.